So what I'm doing right now is I cut those tabs that I was talking about off the beak and reshaped the beak.
I don't like how these are flared down and flared so wide.
So now I'm really happy with the shape of the beak. I've bent it slightly, so I've added that, I've taken that little dent out of it. I've tried to true it up the best I could and spread it out the width that I wanted, and I've welded it up. So this has just been TIG welded. I'll clean this up in a little bit. But first what I like to do is I take a piece of craft paper and I make all my templates out of this yellow dollar store cheap craft paper. I'll start by placing the beak on the paper, and you can see where I've did a rough trace of the outline of the beak, so I know how wide the beak is, and where that inside jawline is really important. I'll mark the center, and then I'll take a ruler, and this is where the fold of the beak will be, so I'll try to line it up to the center, and I'll just make a line of where that center would be. So I've got two center lines now. Usually what I do is I just go to the inside of that center line. Both of them meet in the front, and I'll add a little bit, maybe the thickness of the ruler at the back, and I'll flip this up and I'll fold it. And the straight edge just works as basically like having a break. So you can put a nice straight edge on it. And then I'll go back to the other side. And again, I'll give myself just a little bit of room, the thickness of the straight edge. And I'll get under there and I'll fold it. Then I'll come back and I'll crisp the two sides up and fold them in. And what I've done is after drawing the triangle, I've drawn the outside shape or curvature of the beak. I've bent it in the middle a little bit to give it a little bit of a radius, and then I've folded the two sides over completely, kind of like an airplane. That gives me the two sides of the bottom of the beak. So now what I'll do is I'll take my upper beak and I'll fit the bottom beak into it. And you can see it usually works out to almost a perfect fit. The bottom beak fits inside of the lower beak. Now when I pinch it, it gives you an upper and lower beak. I'll pull the bottom back beak a little bit. So what I do before I weld it up is I'll make sure that the tip of the bottom beak fits inside of the tip of the back beak. And you can see I have excess here. So that's good. I'm happy with the shape of it. So now I know that the triangle size that I've built is really, really close to being a perfect fit for the inside of the beak. Now if I was making a closed beak, I would just fab this up, put it inside, tack it, and I'd have a finished beak. But what I want to do is this bird is going to have his beak open a little bit, and he's going to have a tongue in there. So we're going to do some details on there. So this is the start now. So what I like to do, I take some 1/4 inch stainless steel. I'll be cutting and shaping 2 1/4 inch stainless that can go down around this edge. And what that'll do is when I shape it and weld it on there, that'll give it a round thickness to his lip of the bottom beak that won't just look like a piece of sheet metal rolled over and thin. And then on the outside, we'll actually do a little bit of a lip using this material as well. Sometimes I could go a little smaller, and we'll take a piece of this and we'll weld it on there. And then when that's welded and blended, and then it comes down into the inner lip, it gives you that little extra dimension to the outside of his lip where the two beaks meet, and it looks really really natural. So it's a lot of welding and grinding and fitting, but then we'll be done the beak and we can move on to the head. Now we've made an inner piece in 2 pieces because these will sit inside of each other, and then I'll join these 2 pieces, sandwich them together by using a piece of shaped round bar around the edges, which will make the edge of the beak. And I'm just tracing them out on a piece of 18 gauge stainless. So we're going to make this lower beak in stainless as well. I'll cut them, I'll clean the edges, and then we'll bend them up and see how they fit together. And then after that, the next step will be to shape the round bar. Using the pattern, I'm just going to make a little mark. That one's a little off. Where I have my bends. So when I cut this, I'll have little indicators as to where my centers are and where my bends are going to be started. So when I bend this, I'll bend it from this point to this point, and I'll know that those are the spots that I had laid out for bending. One I'm bending inside and one I'm bending outside, so I just had to transfer the lines to the back side. So this one will bend up, and the good side will be on the bottom. And this one will bend in, and the good side will be on the inside, where you won't see these two sides because they'll be mated to each other. So now we just got to go over to the bender and bend them up.
So this is the lower beak. We just bent up the sides. You can see the nice radius for the profile of the side of the beak and where it ends. And now we're gonna bend this one up the opposite way to fit inside.
When I build these things, I don't really work off of computers or blueprints or drawings, and I'm guessing at the size of the beak. By the time I do the two pieces of beak and then add the width of his head and the shape of his head looking down, I'm hoping, and it's looking good to me right now, so I think I'm on the right track, but I really won't know until I get most of his head built and back and forth with the body and mock it up just to make sure that I'm heading in the right track. So what I've done now is I've made these two pieces, they're bent. I've roughed in a gap for the two pieces. Now the next step will be to take some round bar, and I'll shape that round bar, and then that round bar will fit right in there. And then when it's all shaped to it and cut and trimmed, and when I weld it, that'll give that outer and inner layer that I've been looking for to build this beak. I'm going to put a little bend in here and a little bend in here, and that'll give this piece, it won't look so unnatural and flat. I'm going to just bend it by hand on the table and put a bit of a curve in there. When I'm feathering the body, they'll get smaller and smaller, and they'll taper up kind of into a point where the feathers start off of his chin, and gives it a natural look and kind of a neat look. I'll probably get some flack for this. Putting a hole in this table now. And then it allows you to just stick it in the hole and bend it by hand however you want. What we're wanting to do is get these nice bends to follow the curvature of this, and I want to do two mirrored pieces that follow this. So when we sandwich them together, that's going to fill in and flow nicely. So it takes a little bit of time, don't rush it, but this allows you to do some curves. And you can also leave yourself enough room. I like to go a little longer, obviously. So you leave yourself enough room to follow the curves, and then you can see where the next curve needs to be, which is the opposite. And just work at it, little bits by little bits, until you're happy with the shape. Now that I've got a nice curve here, here, and I'm gonna end up bending it here, but I'm happy with all of this, the way it fits. So what I'm gonna do now is, before I move on to the next side, I'm actually gonna tack this in place, because this will fit down inside of this one. And to do that, I'll probably bend this last little bit as I get tacking, and then I'll just hand bend it into shape. But I'm really happy with the shape of that. You can see how it follows the edge. And then I'm just gonna take this edge and I'm gonna fuse it onto there. And eventually this will be a solid weld, and we'll clean it all up and polish it. We're gonna do a little bit of shaping that I was talking about. So I'm gonna get a little tough with it and do some hammering. So I have a nylon hammer that's not gonna do too much damage. So we'll start with that first. Pretty happy with that. It's just a subtle bend, puts a little bit of a curvature all the way up in the beak. By curving this one, I've narrowed this piece, and there's a couple ways you can get around doing that. One of them is you just put it on the edge of the table and flex this outside out a little bit, because what happens is it tends to roll in and get curved. So I'm doing two things. I'm kind of flexing it out, changing this angle a little bit, that'll be more in line with fitting to this. So that's really close now. You can see now it fits inside the beak, and the beak will be able to close over top of it, kind of like a natural beak. Ooh. I think I can get some tacks on that and shape it with some weld now, which is nice. There we go. Now we got a two-sided jaw. So what you're going to see in the end is this will be all welded out, this will be all ground, and then not only will it be ground, but it'll be worked down, and this will be a mirror finish. So you won't see the round bar, you won't see where this was. It'll just look like a lip of a beak. Now the final test is just to make sure that it fits up inside of there. So that's the bottom view of how the beak will be in there. So these are the kinds of things that I like to fix. I'll show you if you can see that or not, but there's a dent from squeezing it in the vise right there, and then it flares out right here from the profile. You'll see a flare out. So now what I'll do is I can, still hot, I can see where it's flaring out on the metal right there. So I'm going to cut two tacks, and then I'll brace the inside, and I'll hammer these two areas and hammer that metal tighter to the round bar. I'm gonna need a stainless hammer to dolly that. I make these all the time. This was a big 20-foot long piece of stainless, and I just cut a couple lengths and TIG welded it together and rounded the edges, and it gives yourself a nice stainless hammer. I have a whole collection of different sized round bar that I work with, and that allows me to just make hammers. Edge of the table doesn't damage the stainless too bad, and I can smash that, lump that down flat. Now it's all tight, I can weld it, and then you know, right here where there's a dent, I think a little tiny bit of weld on there. When I grind everything off, I'll add a little bit of weld over that dent just to make the dent disappear. Well, that's our rough finish beak. So the nice thing is you want it a little forward so it sits inside, and then it's gonna have the right profile. So there's nothing worse than putting a beak together, and I've seen them, and then you've got an undershot beak or an overshot beak. Overshot is certainly better than undershot, but ideally you want to, if you're putting a beak together and you're building your own bird at home, you want to have it sitting about a ½ inch inside the beak, about like that, and then you can open your beak up, and that's going to give you the right profile. I'll use a little bit of pickling paste up inside there, so if his mouth is open far enough that someone can look up inside, this will have a little bit of acid. It's called pickling paste, and we'll brush that in there, and then we'll rinse it out with distilled water, and that'll clean all that grayish black and blue color that's in there. For the outside here, we're just going to grind and prep this and put a nice finish on it. What I like to do is I'll get it lined up. I'll make sure it's square in there, and then I'll tack these edges, and then I can bend it open, and then it's going to be square and it'll be open to the right amount that I want. And before we do that, we'll get everything welded, cleaned up, polished. We'll get all this cleaned up and polished. So yeah, super happy with it. I like the bumps and textures too. It's not too lumpy. Yeah, and yeah, when it's polished and I put the other part on it, it's gonna look really great. If I can get those. It's starting to look like something anyway. Bad for a few hours. We'll continue with the fabrication. So we're going to make a tongue that sits inside of here, and then on the outside of this we're going to build up the texture and the skin that wraps around the beak and moves onto the head. So there's a kind of a layer that goes on here, and you'll see his nostril fabricated into the beak, and so we'll start getting all that done before we move on to actually putting everything together.